the chat. We'll put some numbers in the chat, and we really encourage you to take care of yourself, reach out for support if you need to, and also link into your own support networks. As I said, we've got a fantastic attendance, so there'll be time for questions later. And we may not, because we've got so many people, we may not get to all questions, but there may be things that Tracey and Camille can take on notice and get back via us. But before we, excuse me, but before we start, Tandem, we've got some information that we'd like to share with you. And Sarah, are you here?
Yes, I am. I'm right here.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Sarah. So I thought I'd hand over to you just to spend a few minutes to update us. But I also want to remind people at the end of the session, just before we finish off, we're going to hear from Joe from Tandem as well, who's going to talk to you about some of the work we're doing in regards to the Carer Recognition Act. That's the federal act. And we're sending out a survey and would like to talk to you and ask you about your thoughts. So I'll hand you over to Sarah for now. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Wendy. And this is just a quick update just to let everyone know of some upcoming work that Tandem will be doing around the new Mental Health and Wellbeing Act. So Tandem's received some funding from the Department of Health to support families, carers and supporters to understand their rights and the changes under the new Act. So over the coming weeks and months, we'll be working on producing some tailored resources for family carers, which we'll share through our networks, through the e-news, and on a dedicated page on our website. We're also, we'll be working with others in the sector to share and distribute our mutual resources. So many in the sector have also received funding from the department. So this is part of a broader system effort to support the workforce to understand their obligations under the new Act, and consumers, families, carers and supporters to understand their rights under the new Act. We'll also be hitting the road and doing a series of in-person engagements and information sessions with local family carer groups, and we'll be doing some online engagements as well. We're still planning things out, but once we've figured out a schedule, we'll be in touch with people, and of course we'll be communicating through our e-news and socials. But we do have a few initial engagements planned, including a rights talk on the new Act at the Thames Watch event on August 15th, and we'll be in Bendigo for the August members meeting, and we'll be doing a stopover in Ballarat where we'll be talking about the new Act and other things as well on the agenda, and some of those important changes for families and carers. So all of these details will be in this coming Tuesday, Tuesday's e-news. So thanks, Wendy. That's it from me.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Lots going on. Well, we've got Tracey and I think Camille's with us as well. So I'm going to hand you over and introduce you, obviously, to Tracey Taylor. So Tracey is the Senior Advisor of Lived Experience at the Mental Health Tribunal, and Camille Woodward is the Senior Legal Member. So welcome, Tracey and Camille. Let's hear from you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you. Excuse me, I seem to be having a few issues. Can people see me or not?
No.
No, I've got my camera on, but it doesn't appear to be doing anything. So if anybody's got any hints on how to fix that, I would really appreciate it. Thank you. So not to hold things up, my name is Tracey Taylor. I'm the Senior Advisor Lived Experience at the Mental Health Tribunal. And we also have today with us Camille Woodward, who is our Senior Legal Member. Do you mind if I share my screen? I've got some slides. Is that okay?
Yeah, you should be able to do that, Tracey. I think we've made you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen. Let's hope we can do that.
Okay. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. So you can't see me, but you can see the slide. So that's the important bit. Okay, so thank you everybody again for attending. We were thrilled to get this opportunity to present, because we really value the role of carers at the tribunal. So I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal people that may be here with us today. Obviously, we're probably coming from many lands, so I'd just like to acknowledge that. So what is the Mental Health Tribunal? We're established under the Mental Health Act of 2014. That will soon be changing to the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act of 2022. At the moment, we have 139 members, and that's supported by our registry team and admin. So each tribunal division is made up of 3 members, one from each of the following categories. So there's a community member, a psychiatrist or a registered medical member, and a legal member. And we are very much recovery focused, person-centred, and absolutely support self-determination. So Camille, are you there? Sorry, I think she's having problems getting in. Oh my goodness.
Don't worry. It's just one of those things. I'm just looking to see if I can see her. So
yeah, she's saying she hasn't been invited in as yet.
Okay.
Wendy, I don't know if I saw Camille in the Teams meeting, not in the Zoom meeting.
Okay. I'm not.
Sorry.
Does somebody who has her email address mind sending her a quick message to let her know the Zoom link? Because I've messaged her in the Teams chat, but I'm not sure if she's seen that message.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Look, I can keep going anyway. Let's not hold that up. When Camille comes, she can jump in and take over. Okay, so the different types of orders that can be made. If a person is put on a temporary treatment order by their treating team, and then they apply to the tribunal, there must be a determination within 28 days of that. And the same if a person's on a community treatment order and the treating team want to have that varied to an inpatient treatment order, that has to be done within 28 days. A person can apply to have their order revoked. A treating team can apply to authorised treatment for ECT. And then there's some other ones, they're not as common. So you've got your secure treatment orders, applications for neurosurgery, and court secure treatment orders.
Could I just ask a question, please? It's Rowena.
Hi, Rowena.
Hi, are you talking about the new, like the changes that will happen, or is this existing?
This is existing, but we will go on to talk about the changes that are happening as well. So we've sort of tried to blend it into one, because we're aware that the new act is coming in really soon. Yeah. So okay, so definition of mental illness. It's defined as a medical condition that's categorised by a significant disturbance of thought, mood, perception, or memory. There's lots of reasons why a person is not considered to have a mental illness. So that might be things like sexuality, religious beliefs, gender, all sorts of stuff there. I won't read out the slides because I will make a copy of these available afterwards. When making treatment orders, our members need to consider the test. So under the current Act at the moment, the test is that a person has a mental illness, and because of that mental illness, a person needs immediate treatment to prevent serious deterioration in that person's mental or physical health or serious harm to the person or another person, and that immediate treatment will be provided, and that there's no less restrictive means available to enable that to happen. So if the patient ticks all those boxes, then the tribunal members will determine whether to make an inpatient or a community treatment order. So at the moment, it's for an inpatient maximum of 6 months, for adults, or 3 months if they're under the age of 18. And a community treatment order, currently it's 12 months. With the new Act, that will be cutting down to 6 months.
Tracey, can I just ask, Rita's popped in a question to say, does dementia come under that as being seen as a mental illness?
I'd like to refer to Camille on that one.
Yep.
I'm wanting to say yes, but she is the lawyer, so I'd like her to confirm that. So when Camille pops in, can I get her to answer that, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
I'm actually here if you can hear me.
Oh,
great.
Camille.
Yes.
Welcome. Thank you.
For some reason, my camera is not on. Apologies to everybody for my arrival at this time. I can certainly answer that one if you like. Under the definition of mental illness, which actually I think goes through to the next slide, it talks about mental illness is characterised by a significant disturbance of, excuse me, thought, mood, perception, or memory. So arguably under the umbrella of memory, dementia could be categorised as a mental illness. Yep. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Camille. And Camille, would you like to take over from here, please?
Yeah, so moving right along. We've just made a decision about, what we have to have regard to when we're deciding, as well as deciding the criteria, which I think Tracey's just talked about. We also must have regard to, or take into consideration really, person's views and preferences, any preferences expressed in an advance statement they may have made, views of the nominated person, views of guardian, views of the carer, views of a parent if the person's a child, and also if views of department where the person's subject to some form of overarching support or guardianship through the department. I will say, as a sitting member, we always ask if there's an advance statement, and our registry team are brilliant, and will always make sure it's provided to us. So we read it before we commence the hearings. We are fully aware of whether there is one or not. As well as hearings about treatment orders, we also consider applications for ECT, and I think that's our next slide. And that's a form of treatment, electroconvulsive therapy, and in deciding that, we have to have regard to, really it's a two-person test, whether the person has capacity to make their own decisions, and finally, and also whether there's a less restrictive way a person could be treated, meaning other than ECT potentially. That's essentially the two tests that we must decide. Under the current Act and the new Act, the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act, person is deemed to have capacity. It's just when the treating team make a decision to apply to the tribunal for authorisation, they have to have made that assessment that the person doesn't have it for one reason or other, and that is that they're not able to understand information. They're not able to remember information. They're not able to weigh it up, essentially take on board information and use it in some way. Or they're not able to communicate the decision. I think I wanted to say that importantly, our hearings are closed to the public. I think that's pretty obvious reasons. The tribunal, we really try very much to have a solution-focused model. We're not bound by strict rules of evidence and procedure. We must always have regard to rules of procedural fairness. And by that, I mean simply, considering whether a person has been provided with the report prior to the hearing, have they had time to absorb the information, have they had access to a lawyer? We have to really consider, would they benefit from that? And really that often plays into decisions to put hearings off, even though we must be exceptional. But it really, I think, our members really have regard to fairness above everything else, because it is a traumatic experience for the person. Tribunal's not, as I said, bound by strict rules of evidence, and we can inform ourselves in any manner as deemed appropriate. I know a hearing I went to was involved in, a person had drawn some drawings which they provided to us, poetry. Sometimes that's important for the person that, to convey their views about things. We're required to consider to deal with matters expeditiously. And I said as little formality and technicality as required. So we're not in court, and we don't use the language of court. And I can only speak from my own experience, but for me, the patient is for me always front and center. And so I think that's when I come to a hearing, when I'm involved in a hearing, that's what I'm thinking about. How are they feeling? They're overwhelmed by using really foreign technical language, which we don't need to use. Yeah, that's all I was going to say about that. I think we're up to the new Act come 1 September. Tracey, do you want me to talk about that, or?
No, I can speak to that. So as you're probably all aware, we have a new Act coming on 1st of September, and this is encompassing the recommendations from the Royal Commission. And there's a lot in there about lived experience, and there's a lot in there about family and carers, which is fantastic. So the framework under the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act is recovery focused, and it does want to hear that patient's voice, which is so important. Fundamentally, the legal framework for determining if a treatment order should be in place by the tribunal, that's largely unchanged. However, that lens that the information is viewed through and listened to is enshrined into the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act. So, and how people weigh things up.
And importantly, for treaters, and when they're having regard to considering whether to place a person under involuntary treatment order or criteria, they really must have regard to those principles, as do we, and I'll speak about that shortly. I think Tracey's going to talk about some of the principles.
Yeah. So we haven't included all of the principles. There's 13 principles in the new Act, but we haven't included all of them. We've sort of included the ones that we thought would be important to Tandem members. So the first one that I want to talk about was the supported decision-making principle. So this principle talks about people receiving mental health and wellbeing services are to be supported to make decisions and to be involved in decisions about their assessment, treatment and recovery. And that includes when they're receiving compulsory treatment. So that means that the views and preferences of the person are given priority. The next one is the lived experience principle. So again, as you're probably aware, there's a lot in the new Act about lived experience, which is a wonderful shift. So lived experience must be taken into account, and it's recognised and valued in the new system. This one's really important for you guys. So the family and carers principle. So family carers and supporters, including children of a person receiving mental health and wellbeing services, are to be supported in their role in decisions about the person's assessment, treatment and recovery, which I think is a great addition. And then we've got the dignity of risk principle. So this means that a person receiving mental health and wellbeing services has the right to take reasonable risks in order to achieve personal growth, self-esteem and overall quality of life. Respecting this right in providing mental health and wellbeing services involves balancing the duty of care owed to all people experiencing mental health illnesses or psychological distress with actions to afford each person the dignity of risk. For all of us, our dignity of risk, some people is quite low and some people we may look at and go, oh, that's very high, but we still have to respect a person's dignity of risk. Okay, Camille, did you want to speak to this one?
Thanks. Yes, we thought that for this group you might be very interested to know about support and specifically nominated support persons and advanced care statements of preferences. Under the new legislation, the role is a slight difference, and principally the role of the nominated person is to advocate for the views and preferences as expressed by the patient. I suppose it's a language shift, but the previous or the current legislation, I think it was to support, whereas this one really, I think, puts the person's views and preferences, I think, front and centre. It's also to support the person to make and participate in decision making, to advocate for any supports that they feel the person might need to assist in being able to communicate or participate in decision making, to support the patient to understand information, communicate their views and preferences, to receive information and be consulted. And I was just going to reflect on Chapter 2 in the new legislation, the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act, which is about protection of rights, and it really puts it back onto the treating, I think described as a designated health service, but really it's incumbent on the health service to inquire whether the patient has a nominated support person or an advanced statement, and then not just make that inquiry, go, okay, they've got one, not have a cursory, oh yes, tick the box, but also then to take steps to involve the nominated person and in discussions and to provide information to the nominated person, which I think is important and fundamental shift. And the next slide, I think, is about advanced statements. Often referred to, we have advanced statements under the 2014 Act. And as I said, we as a tribunal members, and I can only speak for my own experiences there, but we always look at them and have regard to them. In this piece of legislation, the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act, there's also opportunity for people to make advanced statements about their preferences, how they'd like to be considered, how they'd like to be treated. I read one just recently when the person talked about the kind of food they would like, which, you know, had a giggle, but I thought that's really important. They made the point, hospital food's awful, and could someone think about what I might like? And silly sometimes, but on one view, but I think important for the person in feeling perhaps safe and comfortable. And carers obviously can encourage their loved one to make an advanced statement, just something that we thought we'd put out there. And as I said, we must have regard to that. And I was just going to, on that note, talk about our role, while the legislation is really importantly, makes it very clear that treaters, if I can use that word, and caregivers in terms of hospital mental health services must consider the principles under the Act, the mental health and wellbeing principles. So too, the tribunal has an obligation under Section 333 of the Act to really have proper consideration to the mental health wellbeing principles in all our decision making. It doesn't necessarily mean going through each of the 13 principles and weighing them up, but it's about in the circumstances, having not just a cursory reflection, but taking it into account and how it might influence, I guess, a decision. Sometimes there are competing, sometimes principles may be in competition. Views of a carer sometimes may be different to views of the person. But it's about how you weigh that up, and we're duty bound really to take it into account. That's what I was going to say about that. Okay. Tracey.
Hey, yeah. So how carers can support a loved one. We sort of had a bit of a think about this. And we thought about, does the patient have the right to deny access to a hearing? Sometimes patients can turn around and say that they don't want their family at a hearing for various reasons. It might be that they don't want their family to hear about their drug use, or just as an example. Sometimes in hearings that might pop up, but the treating team, sorry, not the treating team, the tribunal members may then turn around and speak to the person and say, oh, well, you know, we can see, for example, that you might be thinking about going back to live with mum and dad. Can we let them in for a little bit just to have their say? So we do try and encourage that where it's necessary and where it's reasonable. There is on our website a link to a form called What I Want to Tell the Tribunal. It's aimed at patients, but we are always happy to receive those from carers if you do want to put something in writing that you want the members to see. Just bearing in mind that that information does get given to the patient. If there is something that you think would damage the relationship, you would need to speak to the treating team, and they would need to put in an application for a hearing, which normally happens just before the hearing, and it's called a deny documents hearing. So sometimes members can make the decision that certain information isn't given to the patient if it's going to be harmful to them or to another person or to a significant relationship. There's a really good online tool that the Mental Health Legal Centre have set up, and it sort of has different links. So there's some there for carers, there's some there for family, some there for patients. I encourage you to have a look at that because it sort of tells you all the steps and how to go about that. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Camille?
No, I was just going to say, really, as Tracey's already said, that sometimes patients or person doesn't want their loved one in the hearing, and it's can be really stressful and distressing for everybody. It's really about a person case by case. We practice solution focus, and sometimes it's not just necessary to say no. I suppose your default position is patients' rights, confidentiality. They should have the most say. But sometimes it's a matter of well, you know, I think a good example, I think Tracey's already said, but if you want to, you're saying to us you want to live at your parents' house, perhaps we need to know a little bit about that. Perhaps we need to hear from your parents if that's to say that that's okay. And so it might be we have to navigate that. I think the best answer is it will depend on the circumstances. It may not be a blanket no, you can't attend. But then having said that, there are other ways of trying to put, if you're having concerns about being able to express your view in a hearing, sometimes it might be a way to talk to the treating team to put forward your views so that they can be aired without potentially that risk. Sometimes it's delicate of conflict.
Thank you. Okay, so how carers can interact with the tribunal. As I said before, there is that what I want to tell the tribunal worksheet, and then you just email that through to registry. We encourage family and carers to attend in person. The members really do take on board, all views. So, Camille, would you like to speak to the rest of that side, please?
I think, yeah, sorry, I probably touched on it a bit too early, but as I was saying in the new legislation to Chapter 2, that the treating team, the mental health care team is obliged to consider whether a person has a nominated person or advance statement, and if so, take active steps really to provide the nominated person with information and to involve them in the patient's treatment plan. And through that, as I said already, the nominated person's role is to essentially support the person to make decisions. Rights of a guardian, I think similarly, it's part of the test for usually the treating team, authorised psychiatrists, when making any decision, they must have regard to, when determining a treatment order, they must have regard to the views and preferences of the patient. And also, there's a long list, but that includes guardian, carer, parent if the child's under 16, others. Again, compulsory notifications, as I understand under the new Act, that if a person is admitted as an involuntary patient, or their order is varied and they're readmitted to hospital, there are certain people that must be notified under the legislation, and I think that includes, to check, but nominated person and guardian. I think there's lots of questions in the chat, so I was wondering whether...
There are lots of questions.
There's lots.
Yeah.
I was actually going to acknowledge that I can see it's up to 34 at the moment. But if I look at it, I think it's going to pop up on my screen. So I was going to acknowledge that as soon as we finish the presentation, I'll go through that chat and answer any questions that I can. So just one other thing here is, with the new Act, IMA is going to be an opt-out. So everybody that receives a notice of hearing will now, that will be sent through to IMA after the 1st of September for an advocate. And that's an opt-out service. So if a person doesn't want it, that's okay. They can opt out and they'll keep a register of who has opted out. But I think it's a fantastic thing that every person now will have contact with an advocacy service. So what if you don't want, I touched on this before, what if you don't want your loved one to know what you've said, if you think that could be detrimental to your relationship with them? There's just a bit of information there about the denied documents. We call them DENDocs. So denied documents. And you can also speak to the treating team if you've got concerns about what you want to share. And then they would put in that application. So the best advice there, speak to the treating team, let them know and ask them to apply for a DENDocs hearing. And what do you do if you disagree, if you're unhappy with your loved one's treating team or treatment, if you disagree about a decision, or sometimes carers and families can disagree about an order being revoked as well. Again, speak to your treating team, speak with Tandem. And if it's about the treating team treatment, contact the Mental Health Complaints Commission So that can be a really difficult space sometimes. Yeah. Camille, would you like to add anything to that?
I was just, I suppose, acknowledging that it can be often very difficult and emotionally very challenging for everybody who often has, person may have a very strong view about their health journey, and loved ones may have a different perspective or have seen, unfortunately, it's the trajectory or the journey, witness that. Yeah, I think that the best would be take it up with the team. Obviously, potentially, if you're able to advocate, if your loved one has a, obviously the first person port of call would be to speak to your loved one about it, but you can appeal decisions. You can also, there's a complaints roll through the Mental Health Wellbeing Commission, but that's probably not part of our remit, and I'm sure you'll hear about that at some point.
Okay, so any questions? So look, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll have a look at the chat.
And I can help out there too, Tracey.